שלום במרומיו, ויעשה שלום.
The most influential man who ever lived doesn't appear on any list I've seen of the 100 most influential men who ever lived. He ruled no empire, commanded no army, engaged in no spectacular acts of heroism on the battlefield, performed no miracles, proclaimed no prophecy, led no vast throng of followers, and had no disciples other than his own child. Yet today more than half of the 6 billion people alive on the face of the planet identify themselves as his heirs. His name, of course, is Abraham, held as the founder of faith by the 3 great monotheisms, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. He is not, like Noah, described as unique in his generation. The Torah tells us no tales of his childhood, as it does in the case of Moses. We know next to nothing about his early life. When God calls on him, as he does at the beginning of this week's parashah, to leave his land, his birthplace, and his father's house, we have no idea of why he was singled out. He is not a conventional religious hero. Yet never was a promise more richly fulfilled than the words of God to him when he changed his name from Abram to Abraham. For I have made you father of many nations. Today, there are 56 Islamic nations, more than 80 Christian ones, and the Jewish state. Truly, Avraham became the father of many nations. But who and what was Abraham? Why was he chosen for this exemplary role? There are 3 famous portraits of Abraham. The first is the one we all learned as children. Abram, left alone with his father's idols, breaks them with a hammer, which he leaves in the hand of the biggest of the idols. His father Terah comes in, sees the devastation, asked, "Who did it?" And the young Abraham replies, "Can you not see the hammer is in the hand of the biggest idol? It must have been him." Terah says, "But that's a mere wood and stone." Abraham replies, "Well, father, how then can you worship them?" This is Abraham the iconoclast, the breaker of images, the man who, while still young, rebelled against the pagan and polytheistic world of demigods and demons, superstition and magic. The second is more haunting and enigmatic. The Midrash compares Abraham to a man traveling on a journey when he sees a palace in flames. Is it possible, he asks, that the building has no owner? The owner of the building looked out and said, "I am the owner of the building." So it was with Abraham. He looked at the world and he said, "Is it possible that the world has no sovereign?" God looked out and said, "I am the sovereign of the universe." This is an extraordinary passage. Abraham sees the order of nature, the elegant design of the universe. It's like a palace. It must have been made by someone, for someone. But the palace is on fire. How can this be? Surely the owner should be putting out the flames. You don't leave a palace empty and unguarded. Yet the owner of the palace calls out to him as God called to Abraham, asking him to help God put out the fire. God needs us to fight the destructive instinct in the human heart. And this is Abraham, the fighter against injustice, the man who sees the beauty of the natural universe being disfigured by the sufferings inflicted by man on man. And finally comes a third image, this time by Moses Maimonides. After he was weaned while still an infant, writes Maimonides, Abraham's mind began to reflect. Day and night he thought and wondered, how is it possible that this celestial sphere should continuously be guiding the world and have no one to guide it and cause it to turn? For it can't be that it turns itself. He had no teacher, no one to instruct him in anything. He was surrounded in Ur of the Chaldees by foolish idolaters. His father and mother and the entire population worshipped idols, and he worshipped with them. But his mind was constantly active and reflective until he had attained the way of the truth and found the correct line of thought and knew that there is one God, he that guides the celestial spheres and created everything, and that among all that exists there is no God beside him. This Maimonides' picture of Abraham is Abraham the philosopher, anticipating Aristotle, using metaphysical argument to prove the existence of God. 3 images of Abraham, 3 versions perhaps of what it is to be a Jew. The first sees Jews as iconoclasts, challenging the idols of the age. Even secular Jews who'd cut themselves adrift from Judaism were among the most revolutionary modern thinkers, people like Spinoza, Marx, Freud. Thorstein Veblen once said in an essay on the intellectual preeminence of the Jews that the Jew becomes a disturber of the intellectual peace, a wanderer in the intellectual's no man's land, seeking another place to rest farther along the road, somewhere over the horizon. Jews are iconoclasts. The second image sees Jewish identity in terms of tzedek u'mishpat, a commitment to the just society. Albert Einstein spoke of the almost fanatical love of justice as one of the features of the Jewish tradition which, in his words, make me thank my stars that I belong to it. And the third reminds us that the Greek thinkers Theophrastus and Clearchus, both disciples of Aristotle, spoke of the Jews as a nation of philosophers. We think about ultimate things. So these 3 views are all true and profound. There's only one shortcoming. There's no evidence for them in the Torah. Joshua speaks of Abraham's father as Terach, as a worshipper of idols, but this isn't mentioned in Bereshit. The story of the palace in flames is perhaps based on Abraham's challenge to God in the face of the destruction of the cities of the plain. Shall the judge of all the earth not do justice? As for Abraham as Aristotle, Maimonides' image, well, that's based on an ancient tradition that the Greek philosophers derived their wisdom from the Jews. But this too is nowhere mentioned in the Torah. So what does the Torah itself say about Abraham? The answer is unexpected and I think moving. Abraham was chosen simply to be a father. The Av in Avraham, means father. And in the only verse in the Torah in which God explains why he chose Abraham, it says, I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. The great scenes in Abraham's life, waiting for a child, the birth of Ishmael, the tension between Sarah and Hagar, the birth of Yitzchak, and the binding, are all about his role as a father. Judaism, more than any other faith, sees parenthood as the highest challenge of all. On the first day of Rosh Hashanah, the anniversary of creation, we read about 2 mothers, Sarah and Hannah, and the birth of their children, as if to say, every life is a universe. Therefore, if you want to understand the creation of the universe, think about the birth of a child. Avraham, Abraham, the hero of faith, is simply a father. Stephen Hawking famously wrote at the end of A Brief History of Time that if we had a unified field theory, a scientific theory of everything, we would know the mind of God. We believe otherwise. To know the mind of God, you don't need to know theoretical physics. You simply need to know what it is to be a parent. The miracle of childbirth is as close as we will ever come to understanding the love that brings new life into the world. That is God's creativity. There's a fascinating passage in Yossi Klein Halevi's book on Christians and Muslims in the land of Israel. It's called At the Entrance to the Garden of Eden. Visiting a convent, he's told by a nun, Maria Theresa, I watch the families, the Jewish families, who visit here on weekends, how the parents behave toward their children, speaking to them with patience and encouraging them to ask intelligent questions. It's an example to the whole world. The strength of this people, the Jewish people, is the love of parents for their children, not just mothers, but also the fathers. And then said Maria Theresa, a Jewish child has 2 mothers. Judaism takes what is natural and sanctifies it. what is physical and invests it with spirituality, what is elsewhere considered as normal and sees it as a miracle. What Darwin saw as the urge to reproduce, what Richard Dawkins calls the selfish gene, is for Judaism high religious art, full of drama and beauty. Avraham the father and Sarah the mother are our enduring role models of parenthood as God's gift and our highest vocation. Shabbat Shalom.